Hello and welcome to Business Tomorrow. I'm Chris Bishop, Head of Programming, and welcome to our CNBC Africa online virtual discussion. This week, a very powerful and topical industry, mining. A very important one for the entire African continent that's currently trying to dig its way out of a fairly costly COVID-19 shutdown. Let's have a quick look at the background. Long before COVID-19 hit, South Africa's mining industry was in poor shape. For years, the industry has been battling against rising costs, falling productivity, and uncertainty over regulation. Years of dispute over the mining charter, the voluntary agreement that governs black ownership in the industry, and talk of nationalisation didn't help matters. Most of these were settled, and the industry was making the most of strong demand from China for South African precious metals and minerals. Then came COVID-19 and one of the biggest shutdowns in South African mining history, at the cost of at least R1 billion a day. The question now is, how is the industry going to work its way out of it? So why should the world care about mining? Well, let's take a look at what it brings into the South African economy. There you are, 360.9 billion direct contribution to GDP in 2019, 8.1% of total GDP, 94.7 billion direct contribution of mining to fixed investment, up on 2018. Total primary mineral sales, 538.9 billion, compared to less the year before. Royalties paid to the tax coffers, 348.2 billion in 2019. And total primary mineral sales, 8.6 billion. Company taxes paid, 24.3 billion, again up on the previous year. PAYE by mining personnel, that's 135.9 billion. Employee earnings, 135.9 billion. Well, let's introduce our esteemed online panelists. Starting with Fortune Mojapelo, the CEO of Bushveld Minerals, Deshni Naidu, board member of Minerals Council of South Africa, also recently Vedanta CEO, Peter Steenkamp, CEO of Harmony Gold, Roger Baxter, the CEO of Minerals Council South Africa, and Bridget Motsepe, Ambassador Pan-African Parliament and one of the architects of mining regulations in South Africa. So let's go straight there. Just to talk a little bit about the impact of this whole COVID-19. You've got a good overview, Roger Baxter, and just tell us exactly how much it's cost. I understand it could have cost more than R1 billion a day.
Chris, yes, hi. Good afternoon to you and the team out there. Thanks very much. I think the critical issue here is that mining was not totally shut during the initial stages of the hard lockdown that took place in South Africa. We tried as much as possible to keep certain parts of the industry going, obviously coal for Eskom, smelters, refineries, certain surface operations for export purposes, particularly if those were essential to other countries. And more recently, we've had quite a lot of input about how we ramp up to the 50% level. So mining hasn't been shut, but there obviously are many operations which have been closed, especially the deeper level ones. We estimate in the first phase of the lockdown, probably 20 to 30% of production was coming out of normal, compared to normal. And then obviously more recently, it's headed back to about 50% of the total, depending on the scale of the operation, mechanized or not, etc. So the impact very big, probably going to end up something like an 8 to 10% hit on mining production for this year, obviously depending how we see things going forward. But the critical thing is, obviously how we manage the ramp up, what we call not only protecting lives, but also saving livelihoods, and the livelihoods around ramping the industry back to operation, but at the same time putting in place all the right controls, both preventative and mitigating, is very much part of the strategy that we've been employing as the industry.
If I go to Peter Steenkamp now, the CEO at Harmony, now you're at the gold face. There's still a lot of concern. I mean, there are reports of COVID-19 cases in mines coming across my desk in the build-up to this online discussion. How much are you, because you're allowed a full ramp-up from Monday as well, how much, how difficult is it, shall we say, to actually have this ramp-up in a time when you're still trying to protect people's lives?
Yes, Chris, obviously, when we had the lockdown right in the beginning, it was a full lockdown for all the underground mines were totally shut, only on care and maintenance. That had a big impact in terms of our cash burn during that period in time. But it also gave us an opportunity to really prepare for, for the build-up and to have all the preventative actions in place, but also to put, train our employees and make sure that we have everything in place from a medical perspective, but also in terms of social distancing and all the other kind of preventative issues that we had to put in place. The 50% went actually quite well, in my view, and specifically in Harmony's case, because we actually brought all the fit people back, all the people that are probably the younger people, all the people that operate panels at a higher grade. So we had a little bit of better production than we thought that we would have had in the 50% in the last month. Going forward, obviously, is going to be difficult because we're ramping up from the 50 to 100%. We need to bring in foreigners, people from neighboring countries. And that is going to take it. So all in all, it was a very hard period in time in terms of hard work, but also to bring all the stakeholders along, getting the regulators to agree to what we're doing. It was been quite a big task.
I'll go to you, Bridget Motsepe. Not only are you a Pan-African Parliament ambassador, but also you're owner of Macau Mining. You've been involved in mining. You're one of the architects of the regulations in this country. How do you think mining in South Africa is going to recover from this COVID-19 disruption?
There's always some logic in some madness. It's a pity that we're going through a bloodbath. We had a meeting with the DG of Treasury as the member of the Black Business Council. I'm the chairperson of the Black Business Council also, and then Treasury DG was calling it a bloodbath. Yes, but when I look at it, and I look at where we come from as a country, in terms of what used to happen in our country during the sanctions, we could not interact with outside world. We could not also import a lot of goods and services from outside. So this gives us a time to really look at our initiatives and our commitment to Section 26 of the Mining Act. Section 26 of the Mining Act talks about beneficiation. There will be a lot of jobs lost, and these jobs that are going to be lost through the closure of mines, or maybe through downscaling or preparation, or maybe through the markets not being conducive enough, can allow us then to implement the Section 26 that says every mineral that produces a commodity, those commodities that are going to be exported can also be locally beneficiated in terms of the end product. So this helps us to look at the secondary industry and industrialization beyond the mining industry so that we can absorb those workers that are going to lose their jobs into the factories. Because number one, the thing that puts us in a pole position is the fact that we're the number one producer of many minerals. And if we can turn those strategic minerals into a win-win situation where we then say, no more are we going to import a lot of goods and services from China and India and other parts of the world, and we will then manufacture locally, then that will bring a secondary industry where then we can go back to what we were during the sanctioned regime. It was not nice to be sanctioned, but it was good that we had a unique industry, especially the textile industry that's closed, and all the other industries that were affected when the sanctions opened and the outside world then could then interact with us. So we must look at it from that angle in terms of locally equipping ourselves, mandating ourselves, and making ourselves uniquely ready for that kind of initiative.
Now, if I could take that question straight to our final guest here, fourth guest, Fortune Mojapelo, as CEO at Bushveld Minerals. Now, you export vanadium largely to China, to Europe, and to the US. What's your feeling about what Bridget Motsepe has just said about beneficiation here and creating other secondary industries?
Thank you, Chris, and good afternoon to everybody. I couldn't agree more with her. I think she makes a very, very important point. The COVID crisis, within the crisis, there is also an opportunity. I think, there is waves of economic stimulus that different countries, governments have to consider in terms of kickstarting the economy. And there's been obviously, talk and around how governments need to take advantage of this economic stimulus opportunities to drive, the move of the economy into the next realm. So if we talk energy transition, for example, what are those industries that are going to be important in the future? And let's use the opportunity now to invest in the infrastructure and the capacity for that. Well, for Africa, it's particularly opportune because, as Bridget said, we have an abundance of mineral resources. And particularly when you talk about the energy transition, we have the highest grades and resource base for most battery metals. What we can do is take advantage of these stimulus opportunities to make sure that we increase our share of the value chain for battery metals, and ensure that we don't just sell commodities into China as has been in the past, but what we actually do is start to develop these secondary industries so that our share of the value chain is much higher than it has been before.
If I go now to Deshni Naidu, you're now with the Minerals Council of South Africa, but for many years you were the CEO at Vedanta, one of the big miners on this continent. Now, one question you're raising is not only the safety aspect, but also the cost of safety, which is already, as I'm sure Peter and Roger will tell us, are very high. How much of a concern do you think that should be?
Yeah. So thank you, Chris, and good day to all the panelists, and thank you for everyone who's tuned in today. You know, mining, Chris, by design is a hazardous industry. Health and safety is very much ingrained in the way we do work. You know, we all the miners talk about health and safety being our number one priority, and in fact, for many of us, it's actually part of the value system. I don't see it being a step change in cost in terms of implementation of the SOPs in order to control COVID-19, you know, to the extent that I think an industry who is not used to managing health and safety risk and exposure would find it. So for me, I believe that with the SOPs that we have in place and the controls and measures, together with the current systems we have, that this should be something that we can absolutely manage, or first, as Roger said, prevent, manage, and mitigate.
So, Peter, if I should go to you now, a working coal mine in South Africa, I mean, what kind of things do you want to introduce to your safety SOPs now that would actually help safeguard lives in future?
Yes, obviously, we are deep level gold mines, and we obviously have quite a big workforce working in the mines. We are quite, lucky in a certain way that many of the mines that we have were designed for much bigger capacities than we currently have. So just the sheer sizes of the cages and things like that actually allows us to have more distancing. But obviously, we cannot observe in many instances certain things like 1.5 meters. So we do have areas where we cannot really observe these things. So we do have SOPs, the way in which we actually clean the areas, the way that people wear PPE, obviously wearing of masks, but also other PPE, but also to ensure that we have one distance traveling, one distance into cages. There's a lot of things that we can put in place. Obviously, we do have operations where we are a little bit more congested, and we will have to look and see how things are going to pan out going forward. Because we are making the hoisting shifts and also the shifts going down the mines much longer, so that we can have less people in that areas. What we were very fortunate with is that we actually were able to take all the different stakeholders with us. I mean, specifically our unions, but also our workers and also regulators, to understanding what our issues are and actually have a plan to mitigate those issues going forward. So far it's been working well for us. Obviously there are mines that had, high levels of infections, but we've been quite lucky so far.
If I could just go to you, Bridget Motsepe. I mean, we spoke last week, long before this, and you were saying to me that, one, you felt that South African safety in mining was in fairly good shape, but we did mention that at least one union is still going to court to try to stop everyone going back to work. What's your reading of that?
Yeah, what happened is that AMCUD really went and they wanted to understand, because they also consulted with us more what the consequences were going to be with the downscaling and also with the safety risks. And also they wanted, then they wrote a letter and a proposal to the DMR, so to engage the DMR in participation with CSIR, the health department, other health experts who can then go to the mines and go through the unions to then give that advice in terms of how to operate under COVID-19 expectations. Because the good thing about us in the mining industry, it is inculcated in every worker's DNA and subconsciousness that safety is first. Even before you give a speech, when you go into the mine, safety first is all over. And what you talk about, even before you start talking, safety first, and then you say your message. So it's just an addition to the safety first culture that we're having, because the South African mining industry, due to the fact that we've had so many deaths in the mines and deep mining, we have to be uniquely safety conscious more than anybody in the world. We are the most safety conscious country. And you find that when it comes to the implementation of health and safety regulations, we have a unique health and safety department with health and safety experts from the Department of Mines and also from our mines that look into the health and safety issues. So the safety issues goes also beyond the fact that we also have our clinics and hospitals right there where the mines are. Just at Impala Platinum, we own a mine at Impala Platinum, the company I'm representing. We even had to increase 100 beds beyond. And we're working with Macau and Impala and the partnership with the community, rural community and the chiefs in terms of bringing them on board. And this is what I say. Fortunately, the misunderstanding between the government and AMCU was solved, and then everything is now under wraps. And according to the interaction and communication, I thought it was a communication breakdown between the two. That has been solved, and everybody's on board. But it gave me comfort that at least there's a union, and the unions, the workers themselves, were very keen to make sure that they also partner in government in ensuring that government is able to alleviate these challenges, not on government's own, but also with the broad-based partners, because in the rural community, the mine is not the only owner. The communities are supposed to own 5%. The workers are supposed to own not less than 5% as per the charter. And so you find that the ownership profile is beyond the mine itself, and the community and the chiefs and everybody can then assist government, the Department of Health, and all the safety experts that the government has for testing and for COVID-19 awareness campaigns that can be done quite easily, thanks to the mining industry and its readiness.
Okay, I'm about to go back to you now, Roger Baxter, but just before, I just want to make clear at this stage, CNBC Africa did invite the mining minister, Gwede Mantashe, and even people from his department, but unfortunately, as we speak, they're addressing Parliament on this COVID-19 crisis. But if I go to you, Roger, I mean, in this ramp up, surely there's going to be more expense and more regulation and compliance in the future on safety. And in the long term, it's going to be another cost at a time when the mining industry is struggling with productivity and its margins being squeezed.
Chris, before you actually go there, I think it's quite important just to state that before COVID-19 became listed as a global pandemic, the Minerals Council in February this year had already circulated to members ideas and standard operating procedures in relation to managing of COVID-19 from a risk-based approach. We then developed a 10-point plan that was released to our members in March and shared with government. And by the way, there's been extensive engagement with government and with the trade unions during this period. When the lockdown was already underway, we then developed the further standard operating procedures, which were basically used as the model on which, and that was obviously in our work with the department itself, the Chief Inspector of Mines and Minister Mantashe. Extensive engagement has taken place, and that really enabled us and equipped us to continue, to make sure that when we got back into ramping up production, etc., that we could manage the COVID-19 crisis in a sustainable way. So, specifically referring to your question, I mean, the industry is a well-organized, well-prepared industry. Look at how we've managed the HIV pandemic. We obviously do a lot of testing, a lot of screening already. We look how we've managed the TB crisis in South Africa TB rates per 100,000 population in mining are now lower than the national average, and that's been through our significant efforts of testing. Last year, we tested 90% of our employees for TB, for example. And so we've got the infrastructure in place, we've got the systems in place. These systems are not necessarily anything massively new. They're just it's part of the disciplines that we have. So of the 200,000 mine workers that are coming back, that have come back into the industry, all of them have been screened, all of them have been trained in relation to what social distancing means, what the use of PPE for managing and preventing the spread of the virus. Every single day, every mine worker that goes into the facilities is screened again. If they do display symptoms, they're tested. They are then linked to anyone who's tracked, that they might have been linked to, is tracked and traced and isolated and possibly quarantined and then tested. So again, we're following the NICD protocols, the National Institute for Communicable Diseases protocols, and we're doing it in a systemic, sustainable way. And so as much as we're seeing a rise in the increase in infections, that's a countrywide phenomenon. It's not just in mining. We're managing it. Our systems are working. We are making the detections. It's helping to keep the workforce safe. It's managing this pandemic very carefully as we go forward. And so from a costing point of view, that's an investment that we're prepared to make sure that the systems continue to operate. And very much as we've agreed with government and as was promulgated last week in terms of the directive from the chief inspector, which is pretty similar to what our standard operating procedures are.
Okay.
We are certainly moving in the right direction. So
all right, Roger.
The last point I'll make is just, yeah.
We'll just hold it there. We've got our first question from the audience online, and it's to you. That's why I'm asking to cut in here. Is the Minerals Council working on proposing any long-term policy interventions that will aid in the stimulus of the industry post this pandemic?
So I guess that could be an hour's discussion by itself, Chris, but let me just say that we actually met as a group of business leaders with President Ramaphosa last Thursday and a number of cabinet ministers. And we've had a discussion about what we need to do, what are the real significant structural reforms that we need to put in place at the economy level. And then specifically in relation to mining, we have had some detailed discussions already with Minister Mantashe and with DG Advocate Mokoena about how we, post the COVID-19 crisis, really stimulate this mining sector and get it to realize its true economic and transformational potential. And we've got a number of ideas, but maybe we can get into those in a moment. We've got a 6-point idea plan that we've been thinking about and working on. And so make no mistake, why waste a crisis? The crisis has given us a great opportunity to think about what we can do to really get this industry back on track. And we're looking forward to talking about that.
Winston Churchill, if I recall rightly, why waste a crisis? But I'll go to you now, Peter Steenkamp. Just so we're talking now about the ramping up of recovery. Just give us an idea from the ground how far away you are and the other miners in your sector, the gold sector, from full ramp up to 100%.
Yeah, Chris, we will start the ramp up and, actually from Monday. Obviously, we would try to bring in some of the people that we have to quarantine and earlier to get them in easy. So we do have a plan, and obviously we're focusing on, how quickly we can get a return on the ramp up. So we, targeting to get the people that is close by to the, close to the mines first, so that we can, get as soon as possible, get more crews up and running. Obviously, getting people from the labor sending areas, we need to provide the transport. It's quite a mission to get them test and everything out at the labor sending areas to get them to the mine. My view is that we would probably take about a month to ramp up to the full production. Obviously, now barring any other disruptions that we will have due to the COVID virus spreading into our areas, we will be able to run at full production if we don't have any interruptions as far as that is concerned. Okay. Again, we have quite a lot of preventative controls in place, and also how we're going to deal with the virus if we do get it. And if we all stick to those rules, I don't think we should have too much of a interruption into our operations.
Okay, and if I could move now to Fortune Mojapelo, Bushveld Minerals. Now, you don't have to ramp up as far as Harmony Gold does because you're open cast, as we've said. But still, you've still got a lot of customers. You said people have been still putting in orders from the United States and China, even in the depths of this COVID-19 crisis. You've got hopes to secure 10% of the world market for this country on battery metals. How are you trying to keep your supply chain moving?
Yeah, thank you. So, look, we have an open cast mine, and it doesn't employ a huge number of people, but I think it's important to just clarify that because we're a fully integrated operation, we have processing facilities, and that is pretty much where a lot of our employees sit. And therefore, when we're talking ramp up, a lot of the work is really around getting the processing plants up and running to full capacity. That's gone pretty well so far, and we're very pleased to see everybody pretty much back at work and working full steam. And the way we are set up at Bushveld Minerals is we mine, we process to produce a final vanadium product that goes primarily to the steel sector. Yes, globally, the steel sector, is one of those sectors that will be hit quite significantly by the COVID crisis. But what we have seen is continuing demand for our product. We have been able to continue selling to steel plants around the world. China and the US are key markets for us. And I should mention that China, particularly in the first quarter of 2020, the steel production wasn't that drastically off the previous year of 2019. So the demand is there. We, of course, have to deal with some short-term volatility, which can be expected. But ultimately, the economy is going to recover. We think we're going to get back to pre-COVID level. The question is it going to be next year? Is it going to be in 2022? And we want to make sure that we are still in a position to continue supplying to these key customers. The product we sell also is not a massive volume product, which means that from a logistics point of view, we've been pretty much able to continue shipping product to the various markets around the world without too much trouble.
Okay, I've got a question for you just while you're there, Fortune, just coming from our audience online. They're asking, how do you see Bushveld Minerals' role in this beneficiation process?
Well, we already are a fairly vertically integrated operation because, as I said, that the product that we produce, we sell to steel industry. It's a fully beneficiated product. Through Bushveld Energy, we take our vertical integration even further, going into the energy storage sector. We think that they are great opportunities, not just for vanadium, but for a host of battery metals that South Africa is so abundantly blessed with. For our part in the vanadium world, we are building an electrolyte plant that will produce electrolyte for the VRFBs, vanadium redox flow batteries. And we do think, as I said earlier on, that the energy transition is here to stay, it's not going away. We think, in fact, we have an opportunity here globally to accelerate that through the various fiscal measures that governments are putting in place. And we want to make sure that we are ready to supply into that space. One of the things that is, I should mention also that I think South Africa is uniquely well positioned is that as a country, we have already recognized this transition and from a policy point of view, are doing quite a number of things, I must say, ahead of many other countries around the world. So if you look, for example, our integrated resource plan and the commitments it makes to renewable energy, commitments it makes specifically to energy storage, these are kind of policy measures which we think create great opportunities for everybody involved with battery metals in South Africa.
I've got a question now for Bridget Motsepe, kind of along the same lines from our online audience. What are the elements that the country needs to get beneficiation off the ground? Is it government policy, skills, technology, capital, or is it something else?
It's a little bit of both, but mostly for the DMR to ensure that the implementation is done according to Section 26. I've been there since the new South Africa, even before, as the first Black producer of minerals 30 years ago. And I've seen how the mining industry has been uniquely strong in terms of the production of the minerals. But we need to ensure that we get the Section 26 of the mining law in effect. What it says actually is the Minister of Trade and Industry and the Minister of Mines should consult with each other. If I'm a mine and I'm selling the mineral to whoever it is that's the end user and the end manufacturer, that manufacturing company should then consult with the Minister of Mines. Nothing stops the Minister of Mines from saying to that manufacturing company, where are you mining? And that company might say company X. Do you know that in South Africa, we've got a special economic zone? And the special economic zone gives you a lot of tax incentives. And the special economic zone, if you have your mining, your manufacturing plant there, then you are able to get a lot of advantages. But not only that, you are the special economic zones are in areas where you find that the cost of labor can also be affordable. And please ensure that you mine here. And a consultation with the Minerals Board that advises the mining minister. I was the deputy chair of the board, the very first board that was created. The minister sits in that board. And Roger, you were also sitting in that board with me when we started the board. And that board is very uniquely packaged with all the stakeholders that needs to assist the ministry, and the DTI can sit in the board because two departments can sit there in terms of creating the beneficiation beyond what we have now. And in terms of in terms of where I am as the ambassador for the Pan-African Parliament, I advise the Pan-African Parliament and the African Union that the 54 countries do not just also have to do the same in Africa. What they need to do is that we are the #1 in Africa of many minerals, and we supply very minerals to offshore. We need to integrate our manufacturing. We need to have an integrated mining, resources, and beneficiation program. Look at the DRC. There's a lot of cobalt in the DRC, and the cobalt is used for smartphones and for batteries and all that. And what stops the DRC from then making sure that the batteries can also be manufactured there? And I went beyond that and I said, why should we be the only country that will not just locally assemble the BMWs, whatever cars that would be here, manufactured here? Why can we not ask maybe Ethiopia, because they are strong with leather, to manufacture the leather? And why can we not ask, the countries that have specific minerals, we look at what they can manufacture in those countries. And by so doing, how can we integrate and make one country maybe the center of the final packaging of the final product that needs to be the nuts and bolts in a car, whatever it is that is going to be manufactured. So I'm trying to stimulate beyond just South Africa, also the industrialization in the African continent. And I'm very happy that President Mbeki is very active in the committee at the African Union that it's looking into the illicit outflow of capital. Because similarly, if government can get taxation payment, then government can make sure that those tax incentives that we can get from a special economic zone can also be underwritten and sensitively embraced, because government is also getting enough money through us, the mining community, and not just the mining community, everybody else. And may I add that our companies that have a primary listing in South Africa are not guilty of transfer pricing and illicit outflow of capital. There are some companies, not just mining companies, overall in the economy that were. And to the extent that Minister Nene, when we went to Parliament to make that awareness, then created a Judge Dennis Davis Commission. And we've all been looking at the regulation to see how we can allow the government of South Africa to get enough tax so that taxation can then underwrite and endorse and subsidize and help lots of the other industries. And through that taxation, not only will toll roads be, and fees must fall, and toll roads and all these things will be adhered to, but also in terms of the special economic zones can also be subsidized in many ways by government.
Okay. All right, so the questions, a whole slew of questions coming in now. I'll try and get through quite a few here, and then we'll get back to talk a little bit more about regulation and also royalties. This is one for you, Peter Steenkamp. Someone says, what does the high number of COVID-19 cases at Anglo Gold Ashanti's Mponeng mine show about the difficulties faced by deep-level mines trying to restart amid the pandemic? Will more deep-level mines be forced to shut down? When will your purchase of Mponeng from Anglo Gold Ashanti be completed? And has the deal been impacted by the pandemic? Peter.
Yes, obviously, Mponeng mine, I'm not very qualified to talk about the issues there because it's not in our hands yet. But my understanding is, yes, it is obviously one of the areas where a vast majority of people has been tested and where there's been quite a lot of asymptomatic people that has been tested positive. And we need to deal with that as a company, but also a country, because if you do a lot of tests and you have many asymptomatic people, how are you going to deal with that going forward? How would you transmit the disease from asymptomatic people, etc. need to be understood quite well. And there's a team of people looking at that at this point in time, also under the auspices of the Minerals Council. So I'll leave it up to them to talk about that. Yes, it will not affect the deal. I mean, the deal is not completed yet. There's few CPs still outstanding. And we don't expect the deal to be completed before the end of June or July, for that matter. So at this point in time, we're still continuing with the deal.
Okay, great. I've got a question now for. Sorry, Roger, carry on.
Yeah, I just want to add quickly, just to say, I think what's important about the implementation, and we've been engaging extensively with all our members, is that the system worked. They detected a small number of people who tested positive. So they did the screening. The screening indicated that those people needed to be tested. They'd come from hotspot areas. Those people were screened. They then used their tracking technology to track and trace other people that they'd been exposed to over the preceding 6 days. All those people, more than 600, were then tested, and they came up with 195 cases, just under 200 cases. The point I just want to make is that the systems work. The mining companies are implementing the systems. They are detecting the cases. They're isolating, quarantining, treating, managing the circumstance. So the critical thing here is we don't want people to be panicking about the fact that we're detecting cases. This is a countrywide phenomenon. There are significant number of cases in the Western Cape, et cetera, et cetera. We're getting the cases being detected. Those people are being isolated. Their contacts are being traced. We're managing this as practically as we can. And I think that's a critical point for everyone to bear in mind.
Okay. All right. Now move
Chris,
to
can I just add there?
now. Yes. So you carry on. I've got a question for you after,
Chris,
but do carry on.
Sure. Just to follow on from what Roger said, I mean, we know mining employs over 450,000 people. And to date, we've screened over 209,000 people. We've done 3,900 testing, I think, as of this morning, Roger, probably just over 4,000. And with 312 cases, that's a test positivity percentage of about 7.5%. That's a very significant number, because to back up what Roger just said, that number tells us that the systems, in terms of how we're identifying people for testing, is in fact working, because that is double the number of the national average right now, which is only 4%. So I just want to say it is positive when we start to see an increase in cases. It has to happen. I think what we need to be careful of is not to panic, as Roger said, and to start to close out mines, because as we are all here to talk about saving lives and saving livelihoods, it is equally important to make sure that we encourage more testing. In fact, I do believe that is the only way out here. Encourage the testing, but accept that we will see an influx of positive cases in mining, not just by virtue of how mining is set up, but by the mining ecosystem, in terms of the communities around mining, that we will start to see an increase in transmission. Simple point, Chris, I do believe that the protocols are working, because we are seeing an increase in the number of cases.
Sure. And I just have a question for you here, just coming in. Someone's asking, I know you spend a lot of time in the boardroom, do you foresee any opportunities for mergers and acquisitions coming out of this turmoil that the industry is currently in?
Sure. Is that directed at me, Chris?
Yes, indeed.
Absolutely. I think we spoke about not letting a good crisis go to waste. I think absolutely there are going to be opportunities for probably more synergies, more collaboration, and I think that will definitely lead to a landscape of mergers and acquisitions. You started the segment talking about the structural decline of mining over the last couple of decades. I think if we are smart, and we definitely are smart as a mining industry, we can look at how we can turn a lot of the adversities into opportunities, and mergers and acquisitions are definitely it. I think coming back to what Bridget said, these mergers and acquisitions, let's keep it in-house. Let's see how we can sort ourselves out instead of letting foreign investors come in and benefit from our crises.
Okay, and I have a question for you, Bridget Motsepe. Essentially, sorry, someone's cutting in there. Who's that?
Yeah, I was just going to add to the point that Deshni mentioned around the opportunities for South Africa Inc. And again, I mean, I'm going to talk to specifically the area of downstream beneficiation, and 2 points I want to make there. The one is, there is generally a misnomer that downstream beneficiation is necessarily very, very expensive from a capital expenditure point of view. It's not necessarily like that. South Africa historically used to be very vertically integrated. If we put in place the right policy measures to ensure that we do go downstream, there's a lot of infrastructure in place that can be resuscitated, and we've demonstrated how one can do that. I think it's quite important that we don't lose sight of, what is in our hands. From a market creation point of view, expertise that we do have, I think we really have an opportunity to create global leaders out of our industry here that is outward looking and is not just about survival even through COVID.
Okay, now I move on to Bridget Motsepe. Here's a question from our audience here, specifically for you, saying that you've always been very vocal about establishing a mining bank in South Africa. What do you believe the role of fiscal linkages to be in mineral development and the establishment of beneficiation? Is the Sovereign Wealth Fund, as envisaged by the Finance Minister, part of your conceptualization of the bank?
We started talking about a resources bank when Minister Manuels was the minister. And we went beyond that. We also spoke about flow-through share stock exchange. And the good thing is at Treasury, we had a committee of all the stakeholders. The Minerals Council at that time was the Chamber of Mines and the South African Mining Development Association, Organized Labor, and the unions were represented, PIC, IDC, NEF, National Empowerment Fund. And we went through the investigation of both the resources bank and the flow-through share stock exchange. Because I said, why should the farmers have a land bank? We don't have a bank. And we also need a stock exchange beyond just what we have right now. The two stock exchanges that we have are unique, are okay, but where we don't get help in South Africa is access to finance. And all over, if you don't have access to finance for exploration, you are not able to mine, nor can you ever even dig a hole in any exploration attempts that you want to do, because there's no money. Now in Canada, you find that there is a stock exchange that they call flow-through shares. It's only for exploration, oil, gas, and mining. And if you don't explore, then you qualify to be in Altex or into the JSE. And that is what we were trying to do. And the Canadian government partnered with us, and they were very effective in trying to assist. Actually, it started, and that time, Minister Phumzile Mlambo-Ngcuka was the minister. And since then, we then, of mines, and then from there, Trevor Manuel looked into it, and he then decided there has to be lots of legislative changes that has to be amended before we can do that. And of course, to date, we still don't have a resources bank. But with all that is available now that you've just mentioned, we will then try and explore further the possibility of how we can access other areas of creating funding mechanisms that will allow us to be able to have money. Because what is not fair is that, and what is also very honorable, is that if I am a finance a company that is that has a balance sheet and a stock and a financial capacity to allow myself to invest. The fairness and unfairness is that the Black person who is your broad-based partner has never been able to own land historically. We're not allowed to own minerals. We're not allowed to own land. So you never find that we have collateral. So it was always unfair that we can never even buy a house as Black people without collateral. But the unique thing is you bring the license to trade, and then the partner will then bring the balance sheet and also the assisting in terms of you being able to get access to funding. And when you get access to funding, you through your dividends, you are able to pay the loan, and it's the willing seller, willing buyer according to free market conditions, and then you become an owner. But we need to go into Africa. What worries me, I also sit in the BRICS Business Council as a council member, and I can see how organized the Chinese are. They go to these meetings with a plan, and you can see their mandate is to focus, and where they focus in terms of access to open to markets that are available. And when I go, I used to own Shaft Sinkers, and Shaft Sinkers was created in 1961 by Anglo-American. And when they went offshore listing, I became the owner. And I used to build mines all over Africa, and I would see how the Chinese are benefiting in terms of the government giving them access to funding, in terms of their hungriness to go and conquer new markets. And we used to be a leading country and in mining in the world, and we are really lacking behind. And with the primary listing of companies now going from offshore, from South Africa to offshore, the Anglo-Americans and these companies that were South African born and bred are now primarily listing offshore. You find that we do not have that strength of the capacity of our country mining companies, but we still have a primary listing in the JSE of many mines. In 2014, when I did a research in terms of the South African Miners Development Association, a research of the 49 listed mining companies. Now there are more listed companies in JSE, but we just looked at the 49 listed companies. The market cap was 2.574 trillion at 2014. Now the market cap of now has enhanced. So I'm just saying that we are very, very strong with expertise. We are very strong with a hunger to do the right thing in terms of safety in the mining industry. Where we are doing now is we have left behind, because there were lots of uncertainty with the legislation that was not yet defined and finalized. And fortunately, we came together with the Middle East Council and the government to try and address these uncertainties. And I'm very happy that our Minister of Mines is the former Secretary General of National Union of Mine Workers, and he knows exactly what the mining industry is all about. And whenever we talk about our concerns, he's able to understand and appreciate where they come from. And I know in South Africa that we'll go back, but we shouldn't allow the Chinese to take over where we could be, as Africans, be dominant in terms of our investment opportunities in the rest of Africa.
Sure. Well, sadly, the Minister couldn't be with us today. He's answering questions in Parliament as we speak. But I'll go to you, Roger Baxter, there. I mean, you heard the background there from Brigitte Motsepe. She was saying that the Chinese are they're cleaning up on this continent, a lot of mining projects. But in this country there's still uncertainty. I know that you guys have got a court case that's just been heard looking for a judicial review of the mining charter regulations. What are your concerns about the future of regulation in mining in this country?
Well, before I get to the regulation, I was going to just quickly also just add a little bit onto the value addition and beneficiation side, because I think, Fortune and Bridget have both, sketched the picture that we need to encourage a lot more to take place. And I think that's right. But at the same time, we need to recognize what is actually happening. I mean, more than 90% of our cement, 80% of our steel, 50% of our chemical feedstocks, fertilizers, plastics, polymers, 30% of our liquid fuels, etc., are fabricated in South Africa using South African mined minerals, employing over 200,000 people and creating significant hundreds of billions of rands of extra value. So it's not that we take the 500 billion rands worth of minerals and export them all. There's a lot that is taking place domestically, but I think the point of departure, and I'm agreeing with them, that we need to build on the framework of how we can, in many of the areas, whether it's specialist battery minerals or others, we can grow those particular areas. Clearly, one of the issues when you come back to the policy side, which drives long-term investment, mining is a long-term game. I mean, any long-term mining investor, when they're looking at mining is a very long-term game. It takes deep pockets. It takes a lot of future foresight, but it takes predictability, it takes stability, and it takes competitiveness. When regulations keep on chopping and changing, all it does is just defer long-term investment in mining. And so if we look at exploration, I just want to highlight last year, South Africa accounted for 0.1% of global greenfield exploration, 0.1%. We're 1% of global exploration total, but 90% of that is effectively what we call brownfields exploration around existing operations, but only 0.1% of global total. was spent on looking for new mines. And so just the point I'm trying to make is that if we don't sort out the little bits of regulation, legislation, and the operating environment, make it more difficult to put in place those long-term predictable investments, it makes it extremely difficult for those companies to press the go button. As the Minerals Council, our members have indicated that if we were sitting in the top 25% of investment destinations by, in terms of the Fraser Institute survey index, that in the next 4 to 5 years, and this was pre-COVID-19, we could see an 84% increase in mining investment in South Africa over that period. So it illustrates the point that there's not a lack of potential to have a lot long-term investments in the country. The fact is that there are still certain issues that are that need to be resolved one way or another to deal with issues. So yes, there are, obviously last year there had been agreement effectively between the department and ourselves on some outstanding issues on the 2018 charter. We did broadly agree with most of the charter, but there were 3 issues. 2 of them were substantive that we agreed to disagree on and took into a court process. And those process, the hearing was held 2 weeks ago. It takes up to 3 months for the full bench of the High Court to come to their sort of findings, and the process will continue. But ultimately, I think we are looking at this from a long-term national interest perspective, that if we don't get the certainty and predictability in place on this specific issue, it's going to be extremely difficult to see long-term investment taking place in South African mining. Now, that's not the only area. There obviously are other areas of policy that we need to resolve, and we have been, I've got to say, there's been a very strong level of engagement between ourselves and Minister Mantashe and his leadership team, as well as with His Excellency President Ramaphosa, in terms of what the obstacles are and what we need to do to get the country up and operating again. But I think we have a great opportunity now coming out of this COVID crisis, where the economy is taking such a big hit, to really put in place the significant structural reforms that are necessary and to make us much more attractive from a long-term investment perspective. And I can guarantee you that a 3% growth rate or 5% growth rate over the next decade to 15 years will double the size of the economy in short shape. It'll address a lot of our unemployment-related challenges, etc. If we don't get back into a much better competitive and growth environment, I think if we languish like we did after the 2008 global financial crisis, before former President Zuma came in place, if we languish like we did then, South Africa is going to be in a very difficult space in a decade.
If I could just go to you, Peter, as somebody on the ground at Harmony Gold, what concerns do you have about mining regulations as this country tries to rebuild its economy post-COVID-19?
Chris, I think, we in the last few years have actually made a significant investment in South Africa. We expanded our operations here by buying, first of all, the Moab Khotsong mine from AngloGold Ashanti, and now the Mponeng and also the Mine Waste Solutions. So we've been, always quite, investing in South Africa. Obviously, from a regulator point of view, we believe that things are turning a tide. I think, like Roger has said, I mean, there's a few outstanding issues, but I think in general, we are quite happy that we are going in the right direction. So we've been making quite a big investment in South Africa. Obviously, in gold mining, there's not that many to be made. And, I mean, the fact of the matter is that most of the Wits Basin has been mined out, but that is what is left. We're quite keen to invest in that, and we've got a track record of taking these investments and then extend the life of mines and mining them for many years. And Harmony's been doing that since the 90s, 80s, 90s. So we're quite keen on on opportunities in South Africa, and we've been doing that in the last few years.
Okay, if I come to you, Deshni, as well. I mean, before this show happened last week when we talked, you said that one of the keys to the recovery of the mining industry and the economy is to get these bankable feasibility studies off the shelves, dust them off and get them up. Now, there's a question from our audience online here saying most banks have low risk appetite in other areas within the mining sector, such as base metals, diamonds, PGMs and complex steel. Now, do you foresee improved policy guidelines as well as positive sector performance post the crisis to give the financial sector the comfort to open up the credit risk appetite for mining? What do you think, Deshni?
Oh, wow. So I think the financial sector risk appetite will not change, Chris, especially during this crisis. But I think the point there, Chris, is we need to firstly save the industries so that we can take out those feasibility studies off the shelves, refresh it, and get on with it. And in terms of saving the industry, I think we must be quite clear with ourselves that this industry does need a lifeline. It does need relief. I know Roger spoke a little bit about some of the tax incentives that we've already started engaging Treasury with. So I think in the first instance, we must let the industry survive through this crisis, and that requires relief. And then with the work, that we are doing through the various business councils, etc., with regards to policy and structural longer-term reforms, that's going to help to give those feasibility studies the certainty that they require for those long-term investments that we spoke about. In terms of financial institutions, I think this is where collective leadership and collective responsibility across the country is required, that each stakeholder needs to play their parts. I mean, outside of this current crisis, mining, as we know, or natural resources, is a cyclical business. And because I've just built a project in the Northern Cape, a $5 billion project. Over the last 3 years, I knew in 2015, 2016, how difficult it was to attract some sort of bank, financing for that project. So what we're going to need to do at a leadership level across the various sectors, including financial, is to take that more risk-based approach towards investment and get the financiers on board to support these projects, not just to sustain current operations, but to make sure that there is an industry beyond current operations that can grow, so that mining can continue to be the backbone of this economy, which is why we're all here, because we all believe that mining has a very crucial role to play in not only the recovery of this economy, but in the acceleration thereof. So everyone needs to play their part, Chris.
Okay, so I go to Bridget Motsepe now. There's a question for you from our online audience. If I can make it out, I think this is what it means. Is China causing our mines to collapse? We need to step up our game like never before with fairness and equality. What's your answer to that?
There's a lot said about China, but China's a good partner for South Africa in the BRICS family. Brazil, Russia, India, China, South African presidents, when they meet, you can see the rapport, and you can see that there is a willingness for these 5 countries and the business leaders to do something effectively. We have unique legislation that allows indigenization and ownership to prevail. There should not be any person who can come here from offshore to take over and monopolize your economy. If the legislation is effectively implemented in terms of the broad-based indigenous laws and the empowerment laws, it can be a Chinese or non-Chinese from offshore, there will be ownership locally. But my worry is when our historic conglomerates went offshore listing in terms of the primary listing, their focus was no more a South Africa focus, 100%, because there's secondary listings in South Africa. So there are no more South African companies. There are companies belonging to the countries where they have their primary listing. That is why I would urge a lot of South Africans, before we go offshore to list, to take into account, while we're looking for other alternatives in other markets, we could still prevail in terms of our primary listing in our country in a way that we do not have tomorrow opening up the stock exchanges and all our beneficial structures that we have be inculcated and absorbed by others when we are still here to do the right thing. De Beers went offshore listing, they then delisted, and I'm just saying I have nothing against the primary listing being offshore, but I do have something against us losing as a country that benefit of a country that will be that provides the platform and the access for investment, and then the country doesn't benefit the 100% benefit that it should benefit beyond, beyond listing.
Sure.
Yes.
Okay, well, we're getting very near the end of our online virtual discussion now, and I'm going to put a question back to Roger Baxter that we did ask earlier about what the country needs to get beneficiation off the ground, bearing in mind, you did say to me once that India's got the biggest jewellery industry in the world, but doesn't have any mines. What do you think is needed?
So I think the right way to define it is that we need to look at different commodities, and we need to understand what we can do in each of those commodities at a strategic level. I think the sort of a broad approach of taking a sort of high-level strategic approach to the entire beneficiation concept is not the right one. So if you're looking at specialized battery minerals, what we should be doing is we should be looking at, what does the global marketplace need? How do we put in place the right sort of financial incentives to encourage the establishment of local fabrication facilities within South Africa? How do we develop the technical and other skills to make sure that we are able to fabricate at a competitive level, and that we then nurture and develop the marketplace? So let me use one classic example, the platinum group metals sector in South Africa. Here we sit with 87% of the world's PGMs. The miners do spend a lot of money on an annual basis developing the market at a global level. And we do have a fairly well-established catalytic converter fabrication industry in South Africa. In fact, we used to fabricate about 15% of all the platinum catalytic converters in South Africa. It was done by a number of foreign companies operating in South Africa, Heraeus, Johnson Matthey, and others. But we were fabricating the final exhaust product and re-exporting it back to Europe. And then the incentive rules changed, and we're now producing about 9% of global total. It's still not an insignificant amount. But I think if we look in the domestic environment and we say, what are the tax facilities we can put in place within sort of special economic zones? What are the marketing arrangements that we can use through leveraging off the BRICS relationship? What can we do on making sure that we have the market intelligence to produce the right stuff for the international market? And putting all those factors together and combining our manufacturing prowess, we do have significant manufacturing capacity in South Africa. Putting together our ability to produce minerals and doing it in a way which enables South Africa to add more value over time, I think is really the way to do it. I think taking an approach where you put in place export incentives and others like export taxes like happened in diamonds. I mean, the 2006 Diamonds Amendment legislation in South Africa, effectively we had 3,500 diamond cutters in South Africa in 2006. I think we've got 300 if we're lucky today. And all the things that were put in place by government in that period related to the establishment of the state diamond trader, the precious metals and diamonds regulator, export taxes, selling 10% of your production domestically, didn't solve the competitiveness issues of the diamond cutting and polishing industry, which basically has kind of like faded away in South Africa. So I'm just saying we need to focus on the things that make those sectors competitive, and that'll help change the game for the country to attract the investment, both domestically and from foreign sources. And that'll meet exactly Fortune and Bridget's comments around how we add value. We can do it. We've just got to be really strategic and structured per commodity.
Okay, Roger, I'm going to come back to you, and I've got a question I'd like to ask everybody. We're getting near to the wrapping up time on this online discussion, and I'll start with you, Peter. Do you think the South African government is doing enough to support the industry, and what else would you like to see the government do to help it weather the storm?
Yeah, I think to be quite honest, I mean, the government has done, especially in the COVID situation, they've done fantastically well in terms of supporting us. We were the first industry that could open up to 50%, obviously operating through the hard lockdown. So I do sense that the government is very concerned about the mining industry, concerned for the growth of the mining industry, and you take the mining industry at heart and see it as one of the core industries for the country. So I certainly have sensed that mining, especially under the current leadership in government, has got a much higher profile than it used to have before.
Okay, I go to you, Bridget Motsepe. I mean, do you think the government's doing enough, and do you think the government can do more to help the industry weather COVID-19?
Yes, I think government has tried to do a lot. I sit also in NEDLEC, and I go to NEDLEC meetings, and in those meetings, or the ministers go, and the president sometimes interacts with organized labor, organized business, rural communities. And then there are working groups, and all the decisions that are made at NEDLAC go through all our Business Unit South Africa, Black Business Council, Business Leadership South Africa, COSATU, and all the other unions, where then it will be then communicated also through Contralesa, through the rural communities. So the consultation is very effective, and there's a lot government is doing. What I would like to see is also the soldiers. They say the soldiers will be there. We'd like to see and we welcome soldiers assisting, or as they were planning, the soldiers will assist in the rural areas with clinics for testing, so that when we go to level 3 or level 2, the testing will assist a lot, because we at the mines are also trying to assist some of the chiefs with the testing of the rural communities. So this is the kind of things that we have to talk about. What I would like to see, I'm always in and out of the portfolio committee in Parliament. I would love to see the portfolio committees also making sure that they work closer, which they do, but there was a time, the past 10 years, where things were a bit more lax, and now there are all these state capture investigations that expose why the laxation was happening. But right now, that partnership between the ministries and the portfolio committees being effective, so that the ministry is also be taken into account for making sure that the implementation of the legislation, we've got unique laws of each and every department beyond the mining industry laws. If those ministries could implement those laws, they would have the delivery of many things. That's why I said, and I'm not saying Minister Gwede Mantashe is guilty. I've been in and out of portfolio committees to say, please ensure that Section 26 is implemented. We can't be 25 years in our country and we don't see a lot of factories in those rural communities and rural places where the special economic zones are, where the people are looking for jobs. And then, so if we can do those kind of things in terms of looking again at our legislation, in making sure that we implement the legislation, then we can have a country that will be deliverable in many aspects.
Okay, so if I go to you now, Fortune Mojapelo, the vanadium producer who's got eyes on capturing 10% of the world battery metals market for this country. Is this government doing enough to help you? And if not, what more would you want them to do?
Look, I think if you ask everybody, anyone will always say that more can be done. And that's not to say that a lot is not being done. So we completely recognize, I think, a lot of the efforts. So I'll give you some specific examples of where I think that there are a lot of levers that the government is working with, and we also as companies are working to. And I go again talk to things like the battery metal space, which I think is really of strategic importance and a great opportunity for South Africa. Point made earlier on around the beneficiation infrastructure. We largely have a lot of that primary processing capacity in South Africa. That's there. It's about making sure that we build on from there. And what you'll be surprised with is, again, I go to how from a capital expenditure point of view, it's not a massive amount. And we need to obviously think a bit strategically ourselves. I'll give you an example. If we talk nickel, I know a private company that essentially takes nickel from one of the refineries here in South Africa and converts it into battery-grade nickel sulfate. The investment to produce that is, in the order of $10 to $12 million, and yet is playing an important role in the battery metals value chain. And this is happening here in South Africa by leveraging existing primary processing infrastructure. Our electrolyte plant costs only about $10 million, and yet will produce electrolyte that could provide as much as 200 to 800 megawatt hours worth of electrolyte. So I think from an infrastructure base, it's there. Can capital be made available to that? Again, policies that incentivize investments downstream will definitely help. What I want to just acknowledge also while we're talking the energy space is, if you look at what the government has done in terms of the integrated resource plan, specific allocations of at least 2,000 megawatts of battery storage, Look at ESCOM, which is going out to tender with looking for 1,400 megawatt hours of battery storage. Or the recently, earlier this year, Minister Mantashe announced that mining companies or big energy consumers that are looking to establish their own power generation should be aided to do that quite easily and quickly. That in itself, if you take into account affordability of renewable energy, is going to create a massive demand for energy storage. So we've got the infrastructure, we've got the markets here, and we've got the expertise. I think what we just need is to coordinate better across all of that. And when I'm talking coordination, it's the Department of Mineral Resources and Energy, it's the Department of Trade and Industry, it's the Department of Science and Technology, because there's an IP play as well involved in all of this. And I think if we do that, we can really create an interesting global champion for South Africa.
Okay, now we've got a Deshni Naidu now. I mean, what's your feeling of hope and for the future of mining?
Yeah, I think firstly, I mean, just to concur with everyone, I think government has responded in the right way up until now. In the short term, though, Chris, I think there's a lot more that we can do with the government in terms of reopening this economy. I think there's two specific roles that I'd like to see the government play more. Firstly, on the healthcare side, I think there's a big role for mining to play here, and that with the facilities we have, with the testing capacities that we can ramp up to, I'd like to see a bigger partnership with healthcare and how mines can actually take care of themselves better in a regulated way. So that's on the healthcare side. In terms of reopening the economy, I think as much as we want government to do more, I think I also want big business to do more. So if we arrange ourselves better, and then if we have a more willing government that wants to work with us so that we can in parallel look at how can we maintain the controls that we've put in place, but whilst accelerating the reopening of the economy, that would be fantastic. I think we're great as a company, or as a country, as a nation in talking. We're not as great in actions. I'm a firm believer that if you want actions, or if you want plans to convert into actions, you need process structure. So I'm encouraging government to put formal processes in place, into structures, cross-disciplinary, if that across the various ministers, to try and give us not just an audience, but to try and give us a task form of sorts so that big business can actually work with. So I will see it across two areas, healthcare and economic recovery, and what government needs to do now in the short term. And in the medium term, as Roger said, around policy and regulatory reform, it's time that we start putting this into action. We have for decades been talking. We know what's required. I think we can, outside of being seen as a leader in terms of COVID across the world, let's be seen as a leader and how this sector use this crisis to once and for all get its house in order in terms of regulatory and policy certainty, and put something on the table. So those would be my expectations, but I'm also not only turning the finger to government, turning the finger back to industry and to big business. We also need to get our house in order.
So just final quick comment from you, Bridget Motsepe.
Well, I think South Africa has always been a leader of economic innovation and economic development in Africa. We should not lose that pole position of leadership. Already, Nigeria's GDP has overcome ours. And of course, for various reasons, we really need to unite together beyond the COVID-19 and take this opportunity that we're having now of inclusivity and the time that we have to ponder and reflect and get a wake-up call in terms of what the deliverables would be, in terms of job creation, in terms of making sure the economy can survive the outcomes. We've survived the sanctions. Sanctions were good for us because it eliminated apartheid, it did away with apartheid, but we survived that as a country. We went into the world and we opened up. We went into the world and also left the country, became permanently listed offshore. But that doesn't stop us. We have a unique infrastructure. When I go into Africa, you see South Africa is king. You don't know sometimes when you're in Africa that do you come from Europe, from Malibu or San Francisco or wherever when you're in Cape Town. So let us build beyond what we inherited and make sure that the mining industry gets back to that position that it had always, and also that we do not allow those others in the world to conquer Africa when we're supposed to be going in partnerships with the African economy. So I'm saying in closure, there's a vulnerable workers out there, they're going to lose jobs. Let us wake up and make sure that we try and see how we can make the alternative opportunities for those vulnerable ones that are going to be losing job to be embraced into being sustained beyond the COVID-19. Thank you.
Finally, Roger Baxter, final quick comment from you, and I'm afraid we're going to have to wrap up the show.
Chris, thanks very much. And just to say, I mean, first of all, South Africa's economy was in crisis before we even hit COVID-19. So at an economy level, we've got a significant amount of work to do at a much higher strategic level to do the hard structure reforms that are going to enable South Africa to have much cheaper, much more cost competitive, much more reliable electricity supply. And that's going to be about bringing in private competition. It's going to be about how we enable infrastructure industries to be a lot more competitive, et cetera, because those are the enablers. On the mining side, we've had a lot of very good engagement with government, particularly Minister Mantashe and his team. He calls me Frank Baxter. I call him Candid Mantashe. And we do it because there's no point in being polite to each other when there are serious issues on the table that need to be discussed. And we have been engaging on a number of the issues. We have a leadership compact in place that was signed last year in February at the mining Indaba. We have done a lot of work on trying to create a more stable and predictable and competitive policy environment. I think there's a lot more work that needs to be done. We are making progress on the infrastructure side, a lot of engagement with Eskom, but Eskom is not the only solution. Bringing in private participation to power is key. As an example, we are modernizing the sector. There's a lot of work being done by the companies on skills development, on technology adoption, etc. And then my last point is that the one issue that really has been really damaging the industry in the last couple of years has been the issue around crime and security affecting the industry. And there's a lot of work we need to do as a country to tackle those. But I think what's important here, last comment, is that it's leadership, collaboration and teamwork which is going to solve the problems. And I think for the first time in a long time, we have that leadership, collaboration and strong commitment and a vision about where we want to go to. And I think that's going to enable South Africa's mining sector to really regain its place as a preeminent industrial sector in South Africa.
Thank you very much, Roger. Indeed, Roger Baxter, CEO of the Minerals Council of South Africa. Thank you also to Fortune Mojapelo, the CEO of Bushveld Minerals, Deshni Naidu, board member of the Minerals Council of South Africa, also former CEO of Vedanta, Peter Steenkamp, the CEO of Harmony Gold, and also Bridget Motsepe, Ambassador of Pan-African Parliament. As I said, we're hopefully going to get Gwede Mantashe, the mining minister, on to CNBC Africa later in the week to give his side of the story. We did invite him today, but unfortunately he's answering questions in Parliament as we speak. But just before we go, let's have a look at exactly what we're going to be tackling next time in 2 weeks' time here on Business Tomorrow. In the next edition of Business Tomorrow, we look at the business of telling it like it is. COVID-19 has dealt journalism a body blow as money and business have dried up. Many of these guardians of the truth are crumbling before our eyes. What does this mean for our freedom and our economy? Find out in the next edition of Business Tomorrow. Well, that's all we've got time for on this edition of Business Tomorrow. I hope you enjoyed it. As I say, we'll be back in 2 weeks' time talking about the media, home territory for me. I'm sure you understand. But thank you very much indeed for your time. And I hope you enjoyed the show. From myself, Chris Bishop, and the team, it's goodbye.